Hi, welcome back to Cosmic and Body Horror. If you enjoy my content, please consider hitting the like button. It's the only way the YouTube algorithm notices me. To whom it may concern. This is to certify that Robert Bloch, Esquire of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, reincarnation of Mynheer Ludwig Prynne, author of De Vermis Mysterious, is fully authorized to portray, murder, annihilate, disintegrate, transfigure, metamorphose, or otherwise manhandle the undersigned in the tale entitled The Shambler from the Stars. H.P. Lovecraft. The Shambler from the Stars, by Robert Bloch. Weird Tales, September 1935. Chapter 1. I am what I profess to be, a writer of weird fiction. Since earliest childhood I have been enthralled by the cryptic fascination of the unknown and the unguessable. The nameless fears, the grotesque dreams, the queer, half-intuitive fancies that haunt our minds have always exercised for me a potent and inexplicable delight. In literature I have walked the midnight paths with Poe, or crept amidst the shadows with Machen, combed the realms of horrific stars with Baudelaire, or steeped myself with earth's inner madness amidst the tales of ancient lore. A meager talent for sketching and crayon work led me to attempt crude picturizations involving the outlandish denizens of my nighted thoughts. The same somber trend of intellect which drew me in my art interested me in obscure realms of musical composition. The symphonic strains of the Planet's Suite and the like were my favorites. My inner life soon became a ghoulish feast of eldritch, tantalizing horrors. My outer existence was comparatively dull. As time went on, I found myself drifting more and more into the life of a penurious recluse, a tranquil, philosophical existence amidst a world of books and dreams. A man must live. By nature constitutionally and spiritually unfitted for manual labor, I was at first puzzled about the choice of a suitable vocation. The depression complicated matters to an almost intolerable degree, and for a time I was close to utter economic disaster. It was then that I decided to write. I procured a battered typewriter, a ream of cheap paper, and a few carbons. My subject matter did not bother me. What better field than the boundless realms of a colorful imagination? I would write of horror, fear, and the riddle that is death. At least in the callousness of my unsophistication, this was my intention. My first attempts soon convinced me how utterly I had failed. Sadly, miserably, I fell short of my aspired goal. My vivid dreams became on paper merely meaningless jumbles of ponderous adjectives, and I found no ordinary words to express the wondrous terror of the unknown. My first manuscripts were miserable and futile documents, the few magazines using such material being unanimous in their rejections. I had to live. Slowly but surely I began to adjust my style to my ideas. Laboriously, I experimented with words, phrases, sentence structure. It was work, and hard work at that. I soon learned to sweat. At last, however, one of my stories met with favor, then a second, a third, a fourth. Soon I had begun to master the more obvious tricks of the trade, and the future looked brighter at last. It was with an easier mind that I returned to my dream life and my beloved books. My stories afforded me a somewhat meager livelihood, and for a time this sufficed. But not for long. Ambition, ever an illusion, was the cause of my undoing. I wanted to write a real story, not the stereotyped, ephemeral sort of tale I turned out for the magazines, but a real work of art. The creation of such a masterpiece became my ideal. I was not a good writer, but that was not entirely due to my errors in mechanical style. It was, I felt, the fault of my subject matter. Vampires, werewolves, ghouls, mythological monsters, These things constituted material of little merit. Commonplace imagery, ordinary adjectival treatment, and a prosaically anthropocentric point of view were the chief detriments to the production of a really good weird tale. I must have new subject matter, truly unusual plot material. If only I could conceive of something that was teratologically incredible. I longed to learn the songs the demons sing as they swoop between the stars, or hear the voices of the olden gods as they whisper their secrets to the echoing void. I yearned to know the terrors of the grave, the kiss of maggots on my tongue, the cold caress of a rotting shroud upon my body. I thirsted for the knowledge that lies in the pits of mummied eyes, and burned for wisdom known only to the worm. Then I could really write, and my hopes be truly realized. I sought a way. Quietly, I began a correspondence with isolated thinkers and dreamers all over the country. There was a hermit in the western hills, a savant in the northern wilds, a mystic dreamer in New England. It was from the latter that I learned of the ancient books that hold strange lore. He quoted guardedly from the legendary Necronomicon, and spoke timidly of a certain book of Abon that was reputed to surpass it in the utter wildness of its blasphemy. He himself had been a student of these volumes of primal dread, but he did not want me to search too far. He had heard many strange things as a boy in witch-haunted Arkham, where the old shadows still leer and creep, and since then he had wisely shunned the blacker knowledge of the forbidden. At length, after much pressing on my part, he reluctantly consented to furnish me with the names of certain persons he deemed able to aid me in my quest. He was a writer of notable brilliance and wide reputation among the discriminating few, and I knew he was keenly interested in the outcome of the whole affair. As soon as his precious list came into my possession, I began a widespread postal campaign in order to obtain access to the desired volumes. My letters went out to universities, private libraries, reputed seers, and the leaders of carefully hidden and obscurely designated cults. But I was foredoomed to disappointment. The replies I received were definitely unfriendly, almost hostile. Evidently, the rumored possessors of such lore were angered that their secret should be thus unveiled by a prying stranger. I was subsequently the recipient of several anonymous threats through the mails, and I had one very alarming phone call. This did not bother me nearly so much as the disappointing realization that my endeavors had failed. Denials, evasions, refusals, threats, these would not aid me. I must look elsewhere. The bookstores. Perhaps on some musty and forgotten shelf I might discover what I sought. Then I began an interminable crusade. I learned to bear my numerous disappointments with unflinching calm. Nobody in the common run of shops seemed ever to have heard of the frightful Necronomicon, the evil Book of Abon, or the disquieting Cultes de Ghoul. Persistence brings results. In a little old shop on South Dearborn Street, amidst dusty shelves seemingly forgotten by time, I came to the end of my search. There, securely wedged between two century-old editions of Shakespeare, stood a great black volume with iron facings. Upon it, in hand-engraved lettering, was the inscription De Vermis Mysteriis, or Mysteries of the Worm. The proprietor could not tell how it had come into his possession. Years before, perhaps, it had been included in some second-hand job lot. He was obviously unaware of its nature, for I purchased it with a $1 bill. He wrapped the ponderous thing for me, well pleased at this unexpected sale, and bade me a very satisfied good day. I left hurriedly, the precious prize under my arm. What a find! I had heard of this book before. Ludwig Prynne was its author, who had perished at the inquisitorial stake in Brussels when the witchcraft trials were at their height. A strange character, alchemist, necromancer, reputed mage, he boasted of having attained a miraculous age, when he at last suffered a fiery immolation at the hands of the secular arm. He was said to have proclaimed himself the sole survivor of the ill-fated Ninth Crusade, exhibiting as proof certain musty documents of attestation. It is true that a certain Ludwig Prynne was numbered among the gentlemen retainers of Montserrat in the olden chronicles, but the incredulous branded Ludwig as a crack-brained impostor. Though perchance a lineal descendant of the original warrior, Ludwig attributed his sorcerous learning to the years he had spent as a captive among the wizards and wonder-workers of Syria, and glibly he spoke of encounters with the jinns and ifrits of elder Eastern myth. He is known to have spent some time in Egypt, and there are legends among the Libyan dervishes concerning the old seer's deeds in Alexandria. At any rate, his declining days were spent in the Flemish lowland country of his birth, where he resided, appropriately enough, in the ruins of a pre-Roman tomb that stood in the forest near Brussels. Ludwig was reputed to have dwelt there amidst a swarm of familiars and fearsomely invoked conjurations. Manuscripts still extant speak of him guardedly, as being attended by invisible companions and star-sent servants. Peasants shunned the forest by night, for they did not like certain noises that resounded to the moon. And they most certainly were not anxious to see what worshipped at the old pagan altars that stood crumbling in certain of the darker glens. Be that as it may, these creatures that he commanded were never seen after Prynne's capture by the inquisitorial minions. Searching soldiers found the tomb entirely deserted, though it was thoroughly ransacked before its destruction. The supernatural entities, the unusual instruments and compounds, all had most curiously vanished. A search of the forbidding woods and a timorous examination of the strange altars did not add to the information. There were fresh bloodstains on the altars, and fresh bloodstains on the rack too, before the questioning of Prynne was finished. A series of particularly atrocious tortures failed to elicit any further disclosures from the silent wizard, and at length the weary interrogators ceased, and cast the aged sorcerer into a dungeon. It was in prison, while awaiting trial, that he penned the morbid, horror-hinting lines of De Vermis Mysterious, known today as Mysteries of the Worm. How it was ever smuggled through the alert guards is a mystery in itself, but a year after his death it saw print in Cologne. It was immediately suppressed, but a few copies had already been privately distributed. These in turn were transcribed, and although there was a later censored and deleted printing, only the Latin original is accepted as genuine. Throughout the centuries, a few of the elect have read and pondered on its lore. The secrets of the old archimage are known today only to the initiated, and they discourage all attempts to spread their fame, for certain very definite reasons. This, in brief, was what I knew of the volume's history at the time it came into my possession. As a collector's item alone, the book was a phenomenal find, but on its contents I could pass no judgment. It was in Latin. Since I can speak or translate only a few words of that learned tongue, I was confronted by a barrier as soon as I opened the musty pages. It was maddening to have such a treasure trove of dark knowledge at my command, and yet lack the key to its unearthing. For a moment I despaired, since I was unwilling to approach any local classical or Latin scholar in connection with so hideous and blasphemous a text. Then came an inspiration. Why not take it east and seek the aid of my friend? He was a student of the classics, and would be less likely to be shocked by the horrors of Prynne's baleful revelations. Accordingly, I addressed a hasty letter to him, and shortly thereafter received my reply. He would be glad to assist me. I must by all means come at once. Chapter 2. Providence is a lovely town. My friend's house was ancient and quaintly Georgian. The first floor was a gem of colonial atmosphere. The second, beneath antique gables that shadowed the enormous window, served as a workroom for my host. It was here that we pondered that grim, eventful night last April, here beside the open window that overlooked the azure sea. It was a moonless night, haggard and wan with a fog that filled the darkness with bat-like shadows. In my mind's eye I can see it still, The tiny lamp-lit room with the big table and the high-backed chairs, the bookcases bordering the walls, the manuscripts stacked in special files. My friend and I sat at the table, the volume of mystery before us. His lean profile threw a disturbing shadow on the wall, and his waxen face was furtive in the pale light. There was an inexplicable air of portentous revelation quite disturbing in its potency. I sensed the presence of secrets waiting to be revealed. My companion detected it too. Long years of occult experience had sharpened his intuition to an uncanny degree. It was not cold that made him tremble as he sat there in his chair. It was not fever that caused his eyes to flame like jewel-incarnate fires. He knew, even before he opened that accursed tome, that it was evil. The musty scent that rose from those antique pages carried with it the reek of the tomb. The faded leaves were maggoty at the edges, and rats had gnawed the leather, rats which perchance had a ghastlier food for common fare. I had told my friend the volume's history that afternoon, and had unwrapped it in his presence. Then he had seemed willing and eager to begin an immediate translation. Now he demurred. It was not wise, he insisted. This was evil knowledge. Who could say what demon-dreaded lore these pages might contain, or what ills befall the ignorant one who sought to tamper with their contents? It is not good to learn too much, and men had died for exercising the rotted wisdom that these leaves contained. He begged me to abandon the quest while the book was still unopened, and to seek my inspiration in saner things. I was a fool. Hastily I overruled his objections with vain and empty words. I was not afraid. Let us at least gaze into the contents of our prize. I began to turn the pages. The result was disappointing. It was an ordinary-looking volume after all, yellow crumbling leaves set with heavy black-lettered Latin texts. That was all, no illustrations, no alarming designs. My friend could no longer resist the allurement of such a rare bibliophilic treat. In a moment he was peering intently over my shoulder, occasionally muttering snatches of Latin phrasing. Enthusiasm mastered him at last. Seizing the precious tome in both hands, he seated himself near the window and began reading paragraphs at random, occasionally translating them into English. His eyes gleamed with a feral light. His cadaverous profile grew intent as he pored over the mouldering runes. Sentences thundered in fearsome litany, then faded into tones below a whisper, as his voice became as soft as a viper's hiss. I caught only a few phrases now, for in his introspection he seemed to have forgotten me. He was reading of spells and enchantments. I recall allusions to such gods of divination as Father Yig, Dark Han, and serpent-bearded Byatis. I shuddered, for I knew these names of old, but I would have shuddered more had I known what was yet to come. It came quickly. Suddenly he turned to me in great agitation, and his excited voice was shrill. He asked me if I remembered the legends of Prin's sorcery, and the tales of the invisible servants he commanded from the stars. I assented, little understanding the cause of his sudden frenzy. Then he told me the reason. Here, under a chapter on familiars, he had found an orison or spell, perhaps the very one Prin had used to call upon his unseen servitors from beyond the stars. Let me listen while he read. I sat there dully, like a stupid, uncomprehending fool. Why did I not scream, try to escape, or tear that monstrous manuscript from his hands? Instead, I sat there while my friend, in a voice cracked with unnatural excitement, read in Latin a long and sonorously sinister invocation. Tibi, magnum innominandum, signa stellarum nigrarum et buffoniformis sadaque sigillum. The croaking ritual proceeded, then rose on wings of nighted, hideous horror. The words seemed to writhe like flames in the air, burning into my brain. The thundering tones cast an echo into infinity beyond the farthermost star. They seemed to pass into primal and undimensioned gates, to seek out a listener there and summon him to earth. Was it all an illusion? I did not pause to ponder, for that unwitting summons was answered. Scarcely had my companion's voice died away in that little room before the terror came. The room turned cold. A sudden wind shrieked in through the open window, a wind that was not of earth. It bore an evil bleating from afar, and at the sound, my friend's face became a pale white mask of newly awakened fear. Then there was a crunching at the walls, and the window ledge buckled before my staring eyes. From out of the nothingness beyond that opening came a sudden burst of lubricious laughter, a hysterical cackling born of utter madness. It rose to the grinning quintessence of all horror, without mouth to give it birth. The rest happened with startling swiftness. All at once my friend began to scream as he stood by the window, scream and claw wildly at empty air. In the lamplight I saw his features contort into a grimace of insane agony. A moment later his body rose unsupported from the floor and began to bend outward to a back-breaking degree. A second later came the sickening grind of broken bones. His form now hung in mid-air, the eyes glazed and the hands clutching convulsively as if at something unseen. Once again there came the sound of maniacal tittering, but this time it came from within the room. The stars rocked in red anguish. The cold wind gibbered in my ears. I crouched in my chair, my eyes riveted on that astounding scene in the corner. My friend was shrieking now, his screams blended with that gleeful, atrocious laughter from the empty air. His sagging body, dangling in space, bent backward once again as blood spurted from the torn neck, spraying like a ruby fountain. That blood never reached the floor. It stopped in mid-air as the laughter ceased, and a loathsome sucking noise took its place. With a new and accelerated horror, I realized that that blood was being drained to feed the invisible entity from beyond. What creature of space had been so suddenly and unwittingly invoked? What was that vampiric monstrosity I could not see? Even now a hideous metamorphosis was taking place. The body of my companion became shrunken, wizened, lifeless. At length it dropped to the floor and lay nauseatingly still. But in mid-air another and a ghastlier change occurred. A reddish glow filled the corner by the window, a bloody glow. Slowly but surely the dim outlines of a presence came into view, the blood-filled outlines of that unseen Shambler from the stars. It was red and dripping, an immensity of pulsing, moving jelly, a scarlet blob, with myriad tentacular trunks that waved and waved. There were suckers on the tips of the appendages, and these were opening and closing with a ghoulish lust. The thing was bloated and obscene, a headless, faceless, eyeless bulk with the ravenous maw and titanic talons of a star-born monster. The human blood on which it had fed revealed the hitherto invisible outlines of the feaster. It was not a sight for sane eyes to see. Fortunately for my reason, the creature did not linger. Spurning the dead and flabby corpse-like thing on the floor, it purposely seized the opening. There it disappeared, and I heard its far-off derisive laughter floating on the wings of the wind as it receded into the gulfs from whence it had come. That was all. I was left alone in the room with the limp and lifeless body at my feet. The book was gone, but there were bloody prints upon the wall, bloody swaths upon the floor, and the face of my poor friend was a bloody death's head leering up at the stars. For a long time I sat alone in silence before I set to fire that room, and all it contained. After that I went away, laughing, for I knew that the blaze would eradicate all trace of what remained. I had arrived only that afternoon, and there was none who knew, and none to see me go, for I departed ere the glowing flames were detected. I stumbled for hours through the twisted streets, and quaked with renewed and idiotic laughter as I looked up at the burning, ever-gloating stars that eyed me furtively through wreaths of haunted fog. After a long while, I became calm enough to board a train. I have been calm throughout the long journey home, and calm throughout the penning of this screed. I was even calm when I read of my friend's curious accidental death in the fire that destroyed his dwelling. It is only at nights, when the stars gleam, that dreams return to drive me into a gigantic maze of frantic fears. Then I take to drugs, in a vain attempt to ban those leering memories from my sleep. But I really do not care, for I shall not be here long. I have a curious suspicion that I shall again see that Shambler from the stars. I think it will return soon without being resummoned. And I know that when it comes it will seek me out and carry me down into the darkness that holds my friend. Sometimes I almost yearn for the advent of that day, for then I shall learn once and for all the mysteries of the worm. End of The Shambler from the Stars by Robert Bloch. This story features the first mentions of Ludwig Prynne and his Mysteries of the Worm, described here as a pinnacle of literary madness. The Secret in the Tomb by Robert Bloch. Weird Tales, May 1935. The wind howled strangely over a midnight tomb. The moon hung like a golden bat over ancient graves, glaring through the wan mist with its baleful nyctalopic eye. Terrors not of the flesh might lurk among cedar-shrouded sepulchres or creep unseen amid shadowed cenotaphs, for this was unhallowed ground. But tombs hold strange secrets, and there are mysteries blacker than the night, and more leprous than the moon. It was in search of such a secret that I came, alone and unseen, to my ancestral vault at midnight. My people had been sorcerers and wizards in the olden days, so lay apart from the resting place of other men, here in this mouldering mausoleum in a forgotten spot, surrounded only by the graves of those who had been their servants. But not all the servants lay here, for there are those who do not die. On through the mist I pressed, to where the crumbling sepulchre loomed among the brooding trees. The wind rose to torrential violence as I trod the obscure pathway to the vaulted entrance, extinguishing my lantern with malefic fury. Only the moon remained to light my way in a luminance unholy, and thus I reached the nitrous, fungus-bearded portals of the family vault. Here the moon shone upon a door that was not like other doors, a single massive slab of iron, embedded in monumental walls of granite. Upon its outer surface was neither handle, lock, nor keyhole, but the whole was covered with carvings portentous of alluring evil cryptic symbols, whose allegorical significance filled my soul with a deeper loathing than mere words can impart. There are things that are not good to look upon, and I did not care to dwell too much in thought on the possible genesis of a mind whose knowledge could create such horrors in concrete form. So in blind and trembling haste I chanted the obscure litany and performed the necessary obeisances demanded in the ritual I had learned, and at their conclusion the cyclopean portal swung open. Within was darkness, deep, funereal, ancient, yet somehow uncannily alive. It held a pulsing adumbration, a suggestion of muted yet purposeful rhythm, and overshadowing all, an air of black, impinging revelation. The simultaneous effect upon my consciousness was one of those reactions misnamed intuitions. I sensed that shadows know queer secrets, and there are some skulls that have reason to grin. Yet I must go on into the tomb of my forebears tonight, the last of all. Our line would meet the first, for I was the last. Jeremy Strange had been the first he who fled from the Orient to seek refuge in centuried Eldertown, bringing with him the loot of many tombs and a secret forever nameless. It was he who had built his sepulchre in the twilight woods, where the witch lights gleam, and here he had interred his own remains, shunned in death as he had been in life. But buried with him was a secret, and it was this that I had come to seek. Nor was I the first in so seeking, for my father and his father before me, indeed. The eldest of each generation, back to the days of Jeremy Strange himself, had likewise sought that which was so maddeningly described in the wizard's diary, the secret of eternal life after death. The musty yellowed tome had been handed down to the eldest son of each successive generation, and likewise, so it seemed, the dread atavistic craving for black and accursed knowledge, the thirst for which, coupled with the damnably explicit hints set forth in the warlock's record, had sent every one of my paternal ancestors so bequeathed to a final rendezvous in the night to seek their heritage within the tomb. What they found, none could say, for none had ever returned. It was, of course, a family secret. The tomb was never mentioned. It had indeed been virtually forgotten with the passage of years that had likewise eradicated many of the old legends and fantastic accusations about the first strange that had once been common property in the village. The family, too, had been mercifully spared all knowledge of the curse-ridden end to which so many of its men had come. Their secret delvings into black arts, the hidden library of antique lore and demonological formulae brought by Jeremy from the East, the diary and its secret, all were undreamt of save by the eldest sons. The rest of the line prospered. There had been sea captains, soldiers, merchants, statesmen. Fortunes were won. Many departed from the old mansion on the Cape, so that in my father's time he had lived there alone with the servants and myself. My mother died at my birth, and it was a lonely youth I spent in the great brown house, with a father half crazed by the tragedy of my mother's end, and shadowed by the monstrous secret of our line. It was he who initiated me into the mysteries and arcana, to be found amid the shuddery speculations of such blasphemies as the Necronomicon, the Book of Ibon, the Kabbalah of Saboth, and that pinnacle of literary madness, Ludwig Prin's Mysteries of the Worm. There were grim treatises on anthropomancy, necrology, lycanthropical and vampiristic spells and charms, witchcraft, and long rambling screeds in Arabic, Sanskrit, and prehistoric ideography, on which lay the dust of centuries. All these he gave me, and more. There were times when he would whisper strange stories about voyages he had taken in his youth of islands in the sea, and queer survivals spawning dreams beneath Arctic ice. And one night he told me of the legend and the tomb in the forest, and together we turned the worm-riddled pages of the iron-bound diary that was hidden in the panel above the chimney corner. I was very young, but not too young to know certain things, and as I swore to keep the secret as so many had sworn before me, I had a queer feeling that the time had come for Jeremy to claim his own. For in my father's somber eyes was the same light of dreadful thirst for the unknown, curiosity, and an inward urge that had glowed in the eyes of all the others before him. Previous to the time they had announced their intention of going on a trip or joining up or attending to a business matter, most of them had waited till their children were grown, or their wives had passed on, whenever they had left, and whatever their excuse, they had never returned. 2 days later, my father disappeared, after leaving word with the servants that he was spending the week in Boston. Before the month was out, there was the usual investigation and the usual failure. A will was discovered among my father's papers, leaving me as sole heir. The books and the diary were secure in the secret rooms, and panels known now to me alone. Life went on. I did the usual things in the usual way, attended university, travelled, and returned at last to the house on the hill, alone. But with me, I carried a mighty determination. I alone could thwart that curse. I alone could grasp the secret that had cost the lives of 7 generations, and I alone must do so. The world had naught to offer one who had spent his youth in the study of the mocking truths that lie beyond the outward beauties of a purposeless existence, and I was not afraid. I dismissed the servants, ceased communication with distant relatives and a few close friends, and spent my days in the hidden chambers amid the elder lore, seeking a solution or a spell of such potency as would serve to dispel forever the mystery of the tomb. 100 times I read and reread that hoary script, the diary whose fiend-penned promise had driven men to doom. I searched amid the satanic spells and Kabbalistic incantations of 1,000 forgotten necromancers, delved into pages of impassioned prophecy, burrowed into secret legendary lore, whose written thoughts writhed through me like serpents from the pit. It was in vain. All I could learn was the ceremony by which access could be obtained to the tomb in the wood. 3 months of study had worn me to a wraith, and filled my brain with the diabolic shadows of charnel-spawned knowledge, but that was all. And then, as if in mockery of madness, there had come the call, this very night. I had been seated in the study, pondering upon a maggot-eaten volume of Ariarchus's Occultus, when without warning, I felt a tremendous urge keening through my weary brain. It beckoned and allured with unutterable promise, like the mating cry of the Lamia of old. Yet at the same time, it held an inexorable power whose potence could not be defied or denied. The inevitable was at hand. I had been summoned to the tomb. I must follow the beguiling voice of inner consciousness that was the invitation and the promise. That sounded my soul like the ultra-rhythmic piping of trans-cosmic music. So I had come, alone and weaponless, to the lonely woods, and to that wherein I would meet my destiny. The moon rose redly over the manor as I left, but I did not look back. I saw its reflection in the waters of the brook that crept between the trees, and in its light the water was as blood. Then the fog rose silently from the swamp, and a yellow ghost light rode the sky, beckoning me on from behind the black and bloated trees whose branches, swept by a dismal wind, pointed silently toward the distant tomb. Roots and creepers impeded my feet, vines and brambles restrained my body, but in my ears thundered a chorus of urgency that cannot be described and which could not be delayed by nature or by man. Now, as I hesitated upon the doorstep, a million idiot voices gibbered an invitation to enter that mortal mind could not withstand. Through my brain resounded the horror of my heritage, the insatiable craving to know the forbidden, to mingle and become one with it. A paean of hell-born music crescendoed in my ears, and earth was blotted out in a mad urge that engulfed all being. I paused no longer upon the threshold. I went in where the smell of death filled the darkness that was like the sun over Yuggoth. The door closed, and then came what? I do not know. I only realized that suddenly I could see and feel and hear, despite darkness and dankness and silence. I was in the tomb. Its monumental walls and lofty ceiling were black and bare, lichened by the passage of centuries. In the center of the mausoleum stood a single slab of black marble. Upon it rested a gilded coffin, set with strange symbols, and covered by the dust of ages. I knew instinctively what it must contain, and the knowledge did not serve to put me at my ease. I glanced at the floor, then wished I hadn't. Upon the debris-strewn base beneath the slab lay a ghastly, disarticulated group of mortuary remains, half-fleshed cadavers and desiccated skeletons. When I thought of my father and the others, I was possessed of a sickening dismay. They too had sought, and they had failed. And now I had come, alone, to find that which had brought them to an end unholy and unknown. The secret in the tomb. Mad eagerness filled my soul. I too would know I must. As in a dream I swayed to the gilded coffin. A moment I tottered above it. Then, with a strength born of delirium, I tore away the paneling and lifted the gilded lid. And then I knew it was no dream. For dreams cannot approach the ultimate horror that was the creature lying within the coffin, that creature with eyes like a midnight demon's, and a face of loathsome delirium that was like the death mask of a devil. It was smiling, too, as it lay there, and my soul shrieked in the tortured realization that it was alive. Then I knew it all, the secret and the penalty paid by those who sought it, and I was ready for death, but horrors had not ceased. for even as I gazed it spoke, in a voice like the hissing of a black slug. And there, within the nighted gloom, it whispered the secret, staring at me with ageless, deathless eyes, so that I should not go mad before I heard the whole of it. All was revealed, the secret crypts of blackest nightmare where the tombs spawn dwell, and of a price whereby a man may become one with the ghouls, living after death as a devourer in darkness. Such a thing had it become, and from this shunned, accursed tomb had sent the call to the descending generations, that when they came there might be a ghastly feast, whereby it might continue a dread, eternal life. I it breathed would be the next to die, and in my heart I knew that it was so. I could not avert my eyes from its accursed gaze, nor free my soul from its hypnotic bondage. The thing on the bier cackled with unholy laughter. My blood froze, for I saw two long, lean arms, like the rotted limbs of a corpse, steal slowly toward my fear-constricted throat. The monster sat up, and even in the clutches of my horror, I realized that there was a dim and awful resemblance between the creature in the coffin and a certain ancient portrait back in the hall. But this was a transfigured reality. Jeremy the man had become Jeremy the ghoul, and I knew that it would do no good to resist. Two claws, cold as flames of icy hell, fastened around my throat, two eyes bored like maggots through my frenzied being. A laughter born of madness alone cachinated in my ears like the thunder of doom. The bony fingers tore at my eyes and nostrils, held me helpless while yellow fangs champed nearer and nearer to my throat. The world spun, wrapped in a mist of fiery death. Suddenly the spell broke. I wrenched my eyes away from that slavering, evil face, and instantly, like a cataclysmic flash of light, came realization. This creature's power was purely mental. By that alone were my ill-fated kinsmen drawn here, and by that alone were they overcome. But once one were free from the strength of the monster's awful eyes. Good! Was I going to be the victim of a crumbled mummy? My right arm swung up, striking the horror between the eyes. There was a sickening crunch, then dead flesh yielded before my hand as I seized the now faceless lich in my arms and cast it into fragments upon the bone-covered floor. Streaming with perspiration and mumbling in hysteria and terrible revulsion, I saw the mouldy fragments move even in a second death. A severed hand crawled across the flagging upon musty, shredded fingers. A leg began to roll with the animation of grotesque, unholy life. With a shriek, I cast a lighted match upon that loathsome corpse, and I was still shrieking as I clawed open the portals and rushed out of the tomb and into the world of sanity, leaving behind me a smouldering fire from whose charred heart a terrible voice still faintly moaned its tortured requiem to that which had once been Jeremy's Strange. The tomb is raised now, and with it the forest graves and all the hidden chambers and manuscripts that serve as a reminder of ghoul-ridden memories that can never be forgot. For earth hides a madness, and dreams a hideous reality, and monstrous things abide in the shadows of death, lurking and waiting to seize the souls of those who meddle with forbidden things. End of The Secret in the Tomb by Robert Bloch. The suicide in the study is notable for the first appearance of the Mythos culte des Ghouls, as well as its fictional author, the Comte d'Erlette. The Count's name is a play on August Derleth's name, which has misled some into thinking that Derleth was the originator of the book. The story also contains the first mention of Louvet Keraf, a fictional priest of Bast from ancient Egypt, whose name is, of course, based on H.P. Lovecraft, well known for his love of cats. The Suicide in the Study by Robert Bloch. Weird Tales, June 1935. To see him sitting there in the dim-lit darkness of the study, one would have never suspected him for what he was. Wizards nowadays are not garbed in Kabbalistic robes of silver and black. Instead, they wear purple dressing gowns. It is not required of them that their eyebrows meet, their nails grow long as talons, and their eyes flame like emerald-imprisoned dreams. Nor are they necessarily bent and furtive and old. This one was not. He was young and slim, almost imperially straightforward. He sat beneath the lamplight in the great oak-panelled room, a dark, handsome man of perhaps 35 years of age. There was little of cruelty or malice visible in his keen, clear-featured face, and little of madness in his eyes. Yet he was a wizard, just as surely as if he lurked over human sacrifices in the skull-strewn darkness of forbidden tombs. It was only necessary for one to survey the walls of his study for corroboration. Only a wizard would possess those mouldering, maggoty volumes of monstrous and fantastic lore. Only a thaumaturgical adept would dare the darker mysteries of the Necronomicon, Ludwig Prin's Mysteries of the Worm, the black rites of Mad Louvet Keraf, priest of Bast, or Comte d'Erlet's ghastly cult des Ghoul. No one save a sorcerer would have access to the ancient manuscripts bound in Ethiopian skin, or burn such rich and aphrodisiac incense in an enshrined skull. Who else would fill the mercifully cloaking darkness of the room with curious relics, mortuary souvenirs from ravished graves, or worm-demolished scrolls of primal dread? Superficially, it was a normal room that night, and its occupant a normal man. But for proof of its inherent strangeness, it was not necessary to glance at the skull, the bookcases, or the grim, shadow-shrouded remains, to know its occupant for what he was. For James Allington wrote in his secret diary tonight, and his musings were far from sanity. Tonight I am ready to make the test. I am convinced at last that splitting of the identity can be accomplished by means of therapeutic hypnotism, provided that the mental attitude conducive to such a partition can be induced. Fascinating subject, that. Dual identity. The dream of men from the beginning of time. Two souls in one body. All philosophy is based on comparative logic, good and evil. Why then cannot such a division exist in the human soul? Stevenson was only partly right when he wrote Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He imagined a chemical metamorphosis, varying from one extreme to the other. I believe that both identities are coexistent, that, once they are separated by auto-hypnotic thought, a man can enjoy two existences simultaneously, his good self and his bad. They laughed at my theory in the club. Foster, that pompous old fool, called me a dreamer. Dreamer? What does he, a petty scientific chemist, know of the basic mysteries of life and death? A glimpse into my laboratory would shock his smug soul into insanity. The others, too, mob-catering writers, pedantic fossils who call themselves professors, prim biologists who are shocked at the mention of my experiments in synthetic creation of life. What do such as these understand? They would shudder at the Necronomicon, burn it, too, if they could, burn it as their pious ancestors did 300 years ago. Witch-baiters, skeptics, materialists all. I'm sick of the whole silly pack of them. It is the fate of the genius to dwell alone. Very well then, I'll dwell alone, but soon they will come cringing to my door and beg for mercy, if my work tonight only succeeds. If I can succeed in hypnotizing myself into dual personality, physically manifested. Even modern psychology claims it can be done. Spiritualism credits its possibilities. The ancients have furnished me the key to the problem, as they have done before. Alhazred knew many things. It was only the weight of the knowledge that drove him mad. 2 bodies. Once I can achieve that state at will, I shall hold the key to powers forever denied to men. Immortality, perhaps, it is only a step further. After that, there will be no need of skulking here in secret, no necessity of passing my researches off as a harmless hobby. Dreamer, eh? I'll show them. I wonder what the other shape will look like. Will it be human? It must, otherwise, but I had better not think of that. It is quite probable that it will be an ugly-looking customer. I do not flatter myself. I know that the evil side of my nature, while concealed, is undoubtedly dominant. There is danger. Though evil is an uncontrollable force in its purest form, it will draw strength from my body, to energy to manifest itself physically. But that must not deter me. I must make the test. If it succeeds, I shall have power undreamt of power to kill, to rend, to destroy. I shall add to my little collection here, and settle a few old scores with my skeptical friends. After that, there will be other pleasant things to do. But enough of such musings. I must begin. I shall lock the study doors. The servants have gone out for the evening, and there will be no one to intrude upon my privacy. I dare not risk using an electrically manipulated machine for fear of some untoward consequences in removing the hypnosis. I shall try to induce a hypnotic trance by concentrating intently on this heavy, polished paper knife here on my desk. Meanwhile, I shall focus my will on the matter at hand, using the soul chant of Sebek as a focal point. I shall set the alarm for 12 o'clock, exactly 1 hour from now. Its ringing will break the spell. That, I believe, is all I need bother to do. As an added precaution, I shall burn this record. Should anything go wrong, I would hate to have all my little plans disclosed to the world. Nothing shall go wrong, however. I have used auto-hypnosis many times before, and I will be very careful. It will be a marvelous feeling to control 2 bodies at once. I can hardly control myself. I find my body trembling in eagerness and anticipation of its forthcoming metamorphosis. Power. Very well. After this report is reduced to ashes, I shall be ready to undertake the greatest experiment man has ever known. Chapter 2. James Allington sat before the shaded lamp. Before him on the table lay the paper knife, its polished blade shimmering. Only the slow ticking of a clock broke the sable silence of the locked room. The wizard's eyes were glassy. They shone in the light, immobile as a basilisk's. The reflection from the surface of the knife stabbed through his retina like the fiery ray of a burning sun, but his betranced gaze never wavered. Who knows what strange inversion was occurring in the dreamer's bewitched brain, what subtle transmutation generated from his purpose. He had fallen into his sleep with the fixed resolve of severing his soul, dividing his personality, bisecting his ego. Who knows? Hypnotism does many strange things. What secret powers did he invoke to aid him in his fight? What black genesis of unholy life lurked within the shadows of his inner consciousness? What demons of leering evil granted him his dark desires? For granted they were. Suddenly he awoke, and he could feel that he was no longer alone in that nighted room. He felt the presence of another, there in the darkness on the other side of the table. Or was it another? Was it not he, himself? He glanced down at his body and was unable to suppress a gasp of astonishment. He seemed to have shrunk to less than 1/4 of his ordinary size. His body was light, fragile, dwarfed. For a moment he was incapable of thought or movement. His eyes strayed to the corner of the room, trying vainly to see the gloom-obstructed movements of a presence that shambled there. Then things happened. Out of the darkness nightmare came, stark, staring nightmare, a monstrous hairy figure, huge, grotesque. Simian, a hideous travesty of all things human. It was black madness, slavering, mocking madness, with little red eyes of wisdom old and evil, leering snout and yellow fangs of grimacing death. It was like a rotting, living skull upon the body of a black ape. It was grisly and wicked, troglodytic and wise. A monstrous thought assailed Allington. Was this his other self, this ghoul-spawned, charnel horror of corpse-accursed dread? Too late the wizard realized what had befallen him. His experiment had succeeded, but terribly so. He had not realized how far the evil in his nature had outbalanced the good. This monster, this grisly abomination of darkness, was stronger than he was, and, being solely evil, it was not mentally controlled by his other self. Allington viewed it now with new fear in his eyes. It was like a creature from the pit. All that was foul and obscene and anti-human in his makeup lay behind that grinning parody of a countenance. The beast-like body hinted of shadows that creep beneath the grave or lurk entombed within the deepest recesses of normal minds. Yet in it Allington recognized a mad, atavistic caricature of himself. All the lust, the greed, the insane ambition, the cruelty, the ignorance, the fiend-spawned secrets of his soul within the body of a gigantic ape. As if in answer to his recognition, the creature laughed, and tentacles of horror gripped the wizard's heart. The thing was coming toward him. It meant to destroy him, as evil always does. Allington, his tiny body ludicrously struggling to move quickly, while impeded by clothes now ridiculously large for his diminutive frame, raced from his chair and flattened himself against the wall of the study. His voice, curiously treble, shrieked frantic supplication and futile commands to the approaching nemesis. His prayers and curses turned to the hoarse gibberings of madness as the huge beast lunged across the table. His experiment was succeeding with a vengeance. Vengeance! His glaring eyes watched, fascinated, as one great paw grasped the paper knife, and fearsome laughter riddled the night. It was laughing. Laughing. Somewhere, an alarm clock rang, but the wizard could not hear. They found James Allington lying dead upon his study floor. There was a paper knife embedded in his breast, and they called it suicide, for no one could possibly have entered that locked and windowless room. But that did not explain the fingerprints on the handle of the knife, the terrible fingerprints, like those left by the hand of a gigantic ape. End of The Suicide in the Study by Robert Bloch. The Laughter of a Ghoul by Robert Bloch. The Fantasy Fan, December 1934. Have you ever heard the laughter of a ghoul? Shrill and high, it rises and ululates with the cadence of a song from the pit. Hearing it brings the soul closer to strange terrors, and gives the listener vague glimpses into half-open doorways through which no man should peer too closely. Once I heard that mocking laughter in the silence of the night, and since that evil-fated day the night has held neither silence nor surcease from the haunting memory of that mirth or madness. Ever it lurks and lingers in the shadows of my brain, till only through expression of my torment can I hope to maintain my sanity in a world made hideous by the nemesis of inescapable memory. In all the rude mass realms of nightmare, there is nothing equaling in foulness that grim and fearful monster known to legend as the Ghoul. Accursed is he, and accursed the land burdened by his presence. In such a land I dwelt, lord of an ancient, remote line. Slithering secrets dwelt within the archaic avenues of the vast and sombre forest near my manor in the hills. Secrets black and hideous, haunting and unspeakable, such as demonian presences mumble nightly in the aeon dead, abysses beyond the light of stars. Here in this forlorn realm of trickling tarns and baleful solitude, my newly wedded and beloved bride chanced one day to wander, as in rustic holiday. All unbeknowing, I spent the day in town, returning only as eventide drew near. But she, my beloved, did not return, even with the coming of darkness. Then it was that the frightened servants who met me at the gate babbled that which sent me racing off, torch in hand, into the depths of the dream wood, looming so loathsomely in the unholy luminance of the autumn moon. Shrieking and cursing I went on, gibbering threats to the skies, but more dreadful still was my silence when at last I reached the end of my quest. Do not ask me how or where I found her. She was not dead, But she would have been better so after what it had done. She never spoke after I found her, and I do not think that she knew me. I pray that she did not. I carried her back to the manor and delivered her to the care of the servants. Then, with a score of retainers, I returned again to the forest to do that which must be done, and to eradicate certain discoveries whose very existence was an insult to sanity. There were bloated trees to cut down, and creepers to be torn from the depths of nameless graves. There were curious holes to be blocked with massive stones, and certain tracks and monstrous footprints over which the good cure must pronounce exorcism. There was another shrub-hidden cavern in the swamps, containing grisly but unmistakable evidences of tenancy. One such place I entered alone and performed a deed with the long sword my grandsire had wielded in the Orient. Then I collapsed and was carried home upon a hastily improvised litter of birchen branches, to toss for many weeks thereafter in the delirious agony of mocking, cacodemoniacal memory. After that I spent many days poring unceasingly over disquieting bits of ancient legendary concerning the forest and its ghastly presences, whilst awaiting the birth of my wife's child. For she, in a condition of unsensibility precluding her removal from the manor, was about to become a mother, and so slowly passed the dreary months of waiting and expectancy, whilst over all hung the shadow of an impinging dread. At last the day arrived when, as I brooded in my study, poring over the chronicle of a woodsman who had heard the pipes of Pan, the midwife came and gently touched me on the shoulder. In faltering accents she whispered that my wife was dead. I sat there dully for 5 endless minutes. Then, in a voice sepulchrally muted, I asked after my child. She led me silently into the room where dead mother and living infant lay. Yes, the child was alive, still is alive, but I will say no more. May the ultimate powers consign it, and the fate that produced it, to everlasting torment. For it was when I entered that room where the dead mother and the living infant lay that I heard for the first time the laughter of a ghoul. End of The Laughter of a Ghoul by Robert Bloch. The Creeper in the Crypt by Robert Bloch. Weird Tales, July 1937. In Arkham, where ancient gables point like wizards' fingers to the sky, strange tales are told. But then, strange tales are always current in Arkham. There is a tale for every rotting ruin, a story for every little corpse-eye window that stares out at the sea when the fog comes up. Here, fantastic fancy seems to flourish, nourished at the shriveled witch-paps of the town itself, sucking the graveyards dry of legend and draining at the dark dugs of superstition. For Arkham was a queer place once, abode of witch and warlock, familiar and fiend. In olden days the king's men cleared the town of wizardry. Again, in 1818, the new government stepped in to destroy some particularly atrocious boroughs in and about some of the more ancient houses, and incidentally, to dig up a graveyard better left untouched. Then, in 1869, came the great immigrant panic in Old Town Street, when the mouldering mansion of Cyrus Hook was burned to the ground by fear-crazed foreigners. Even since then, there have been scares. The affair of the witch house, and the peculiar episodes attendant upon the fate of certain missing children at All Hallows Time have caused their share of talk. But that isn't why the G-men stepped in. The federal government is usually uninterested in supernatural stories. That is, they were. Up to the time I told the authorities about the death of Joe Righetti. That's how they happened to come. I brought them. Because, you see, I was with Joe Righetti just before he died, and shortly after. I didn't see him die, and I'm thankful for that. I don't think I could have stood watching if what I suspect is true. It's because of what I suspect that I went to the government for help. They've sent men down here now to investigate, and I hope they find enough to convince them that what I told them is actual fact. If they don't find the tunnels, or I was mistaken about the trap door, at least I can show them Joe Righetti's body. That ought to convince anybody, I guess. I can't blame them for being skeptical, though. I was skeptical myself once, and so were Joe Righetti and his mob, I suppose. But since then, I have learned that it is wiser not to scoff at what one does not understand. There are more things on earth than those who walk about upon its surface. There are others that creep and crawl below. I had never heard of Joe Righetti until I was kidnapped. That isn't so hard to understand. Righetti was a gangster and a stranger in the town. I am descended from Sir Ambrose Abbott, one of the original settlers. At the time of which I speak, I was living alone in the family place on Bascombe Street. The life of a painter demands solitude. My immediate family was dead, and although socially prominent through accident of birth, I had but few friends. Consequently, it is hard to understand why Righetti chose me to kidnap first. But then, he was a stranger. Later, I learned that he had been in town only a week, staying ostensibly at a hotel with 3 other men, none of whom was subsequently apprehended. But Joe Righetti was a totally unknown factor in my mind, until that night when I left Tarleton's party at his home on Sewell Street. It was one of the few invitations I had accepted in the past year. Tarleton had urged me, and as he was an old friend, I obliged. It had been a pleasant evening. Brent, the psychiatrist, was there, and Colonel Warren, as well as my old companions of college days, Harold Gower and the Reverend Williams. After a pleasant enough evening, I left, planning to walk home as I usually did, by choice. It was a lovely evening, with a dead moon wrapped in a shroud of clouds, riding the purple sky. The old houses looked like silver palaces in the mystic moonlight, deserted palaces in a land where all but memories are dead. For the streets of Arkham are bare at midnight, and over all hangs the age-old enchantment of days gone by. Trees tossed their twisted tops to the sky and stood like furtive conspirators in little groups together, while the wind whispered its plots through their branches. It was a night to inspire the fabulous thought and imaginative morbidities I loved so well. I walked slowly, contentedly, my thoughts free and far away. I never saw the car following me, or the man lurking ahead in the gloom. I strolled past the great tree in front of the Carter house, and then, without warning, balls of fire burst within my head, and I plunged, unconscious, into waiting arms. When I recovered, I was already there in the cellar, lying on a bench. It was a large cellar, an old cellar. Wherever I looked, there was stone and cobwebs. Behind me lay the stairs down which I had been carried. To the left was a little room, like a fruit cellar. Far down the stone wall to the right I could discern the looming outlines of a coal pile, though furnace there was none. Directly in the space before me was a table and 2 chairs. The table was occupied by an oil lamp and a pack of cards in solitaire formation. The chairs were likewise occupied by 2 men, my captors. One of them, a big red-faced man with the neck of a hog, was speaking. "Yeah, Righetti. We got him easy. We follow him, like you say, from house, and grab him in front of tree. Right away come here, nobody saw nothing." "Where's Slim and the Greek?" asked the man who was playing solitaire, looking up. He was short, slim and sallow. His hair was dark, his complexion swarthy. Italian, I decided. Probably the leader. I realized, of course, that I had been kidnapped. Where I was or who my captors were, I could not say. My throbbing head cleared, and I had enough sense not to bluster or start trouble. These weren't local men, not with those clothes, and there was an ominous bulge in the dark man's coat pocket. I decided to play possum and await developments. The hog-necked man was replying to the other's question. "I tell Slim and Greek to go back to hotel with car," he said. "Just like you say, boss." "Good work, Polak," said the other, lighting a cigar. "I do my best for you, Joe Righetti," said the big man in his broken dialect. Yeah, sure, I know you do, the swarthy Rigetti replied. Just keep it up, and we're going to be all set, see? Once I put the snatch on a few more of these birds, we'll clean up. The local coppers are all stiffs, and as soon as I get a line on some more of these old families, we'll be taking in the dough regular. I beg your pardon, I said. Oh, awake, eh? The thin Italian didn't move from the table. Glad to hear it. Sorry the boys had to get rough, mister. Just sit tight and everything's going to be swell. I'm glad to hear that, I replied sarcastically. You see, I'm not accustomed to being kidnapped. Well, let me handle it, said Joe Rigetti. I'll show you the ropes. Thanks, I retorted. You already have. And I pointed to the ones that bound my hands and feet. Sense of humor, eh? Okay, hope your friends come across with the dough after they get this letter I wrote. Or maybe the rest isn't going to be so funny. What next? I said, desperately hoping that something would turn up to give me an opening of some sort. You'll see soon enough, advised the man. First, I'm going to sit with you down here for the rest of the night. The Pole's face paled. No, boss, he begged. You know, stay down here. Why not? Rasped Rigetti harshly. What's the matter with you, Polak, turning yellow on me, eh? I'm not, whined the man. But you know what happened has here before, boss. How they find Tony Filippo's leg lying on floor with no body left. Lay off the bedtime stories. Rigetti chuckled. You yokels make me sick with that stuff. But dot's true, boss. They never was for to find any more of old Tony Filippo, just his leg on cellar floor. Dot why his mob go way so quick. They no want for to die too. What do you mean die? Snarled Rigetti testily. The Pole's face paled, and his voice sank to a hushed whisper that blended with the cellar's darkness. A shadow voice in a shadow world. Dot what everyone say, boss. Dot house is witched, like haunted one maybe. Nobody put Tony Filippo on spot. Dot fella, he too damn smart guy. But he sit all alone here one night, and something come up from earth and swallow him, all but leg. Will you shut up? Rigetti cut in. That's a lot of hooey. Some wise guy put the heat on Filippo and got rid of the body. Only his leg was left to scare off the rest of his mob. Are you trying to tell me a ghost killed him, sap? Yeah, sure, insisted the Pole. No man killed Tony. Not like you say, anyhow. Find leg all right, but all over is lot blood on floor, and little pieces skin. No fella kill man like Dot, only spirit. Vampire, maybe. Nuts! Rigetti was scornfully biting his cigar. Maybe so, but look, here is blood. And the Pole pointed a stubby finger at the floor and cellar wall to the left. Rigetti followed it with his gaze. There was blood, all right. Great, rusty blobs of blood, spattered all over the floor and wall like the pigments on the palette of a mad painter. No man kill a fella like Dot, the Pole muttered. Not even axe make such mess. And you know what fellas they say about Filippo's leg was all full of tooth marks? Right, mused the other, thoughtfully. And the rest of his gang did get out of here pretty fast after it happened. Didn't try to hide the body or do anything about it. He frowned. But that doesn't prove any baloney about ghosts or vampires. You've been reading too many bum magazines lately, Polak. He laughed. What about Iron Door? Grumbled the Pole accusingly, his red face flushing. What about Iron Door back of coal in Coal Pile, huh? You know what fellas down by Black Jim's place say about house with iron door and cellar? Yeah, Rigetti's face clouded. You no look by Iron Door yet, boss, the man continued. Maybe you find something behind door yet, like fellas say, Dot where Ting Dot got Filippo came from, Dot where it hide. Police they not find door either when they come. Just find leg and blood and shut up house. But fellas know. They tell me plenty about house with iron door in cellar. Say it bad place from old days when witch fellas live here. It lead to hill back of house. Cemetery maybe. Perhaps Dot's why nobody live here so long. afraid of what hides on other side of door, what come out and kill Tony Filippo. I know about house with iron door in cellar all right. I knew about the house too, so that's where I was at, in the old Chambers house on Pringle Street. Many a story I've heard from the old folks when I was a boy about the old man, Ezekiel Chambers, whose wizard tricks bequeathed him such an unsavory reputation in colonial days. I knew about Jonathan Dark, the other owner, who had been tried for smuggling just before the terrible days of 1818, and the abhorrent practice of grave robbing he had been said to pursue in the ancient cemetery directly behind the house, on the hill. Many peculiar rumors were circulated about the mouldering house with the iron door in the cellar at this time. About the door particularly, which Dark was said to use as a passageway for bringing his stolen cadavers back to dispose of. It was even claimed that the door had never been opened when Dark was tried, because of his astounding and hideous claim that the key which locked it was on the other side. Dark had died during the trial, while in prison, babbling blasphemies that no man dared believe, monstrous hints of what lay beneath the old graveyard on the hill, of tunnels and burrows and secret vaults used in witch days for unhallowed rites. He spoke of tenants in these vaults too, and of what sometimes would come to visit the house from below when a wizard invoked it with the proper spells and sacrifice. There was more too, but then Dark was quite mad. At least everyone thought it better to believe so. Old tales die. The house had stood deserted for many years, until most men forgot the reason for which it had been forsaken, ascribing its vacancy only to age. The public today were utterly unaware of the legends. Only the old ones remembered, the old ones who whispered their stories to me when I was a boy. So this was the dark house to which I had been brought, and this was the very cellar of the tales in question. I gathered from the remarks between Rigetti and the superstitious Pole that another gang had recently used it for a hideaway until the death of their leader. Indeed, I even vaguely remembered some newspaper reports of Tony Filippo's murder. And now Rigetti had come from New York to use it as a base. Clever scheme of his, evidently, coming to an old New England town and kidnapping the local gentry to hold for ransom, then hiding them away in some old deserted house so conveniently protected by superstition. I suppose that there would be more victims after me too. The man was smart and cunning enough to get away with it. These thoughts flashed through my mind during the argument between the Pole and his leader, but their altercation came to an abrupt halt. "I wish you get off here," the Pole was saying. "If you stay only one night, ting he come. Dot's all Tony Filippo stay." "Shut up, you fool. Didn't we stay here last night too, before the job, and nothing happened?" "Yeah, sure, I know. But we stay upstairs, not by cellar." "Why not keep fella upstairs?" "Because we can't afford to risk being seen," Rigetti snapped wearily. "Now, cut the chatter." He turned to me. "Listen, you. I'm sending this guy out with a ransom letter right now to your friends back at the party. All you have to do is keep your mouth shut and sit tight. But any funny business means you're through, see?" I kept silent. "Take him in there, Polak, and tie him up." Rigetti indicated a fruit cellar adjacent to the stairs. The Pole, still grumbling, dragged me across the floor and into the room. He lit a candle, casting strange shadows over the cobwebbed, dust-drowned shelving on the walls. Jars of preserves still stood untouched, storing, perhaps, the crop of 100 years ago. Broken jars were still strewn about on the tottering table. As I glanced about, the Pole tossed me into a chair beside the rickety board and proceeded to lash me to it firmly with a stout rope. I was not gagged or blindfolded again, though the choking atmosphere about me served as a good substitute for both. He left me, closing the door. I was alone in the candle-lit quiet. I strained my ears and was rewarded by hearing Rigetti dismiss his henchman for the night, evidently to deliver the ransom note to the proper authorities. He, Rigetti, would stay behind on guard. "Don't run into any ghosts on your way," he called after his companion as the big pole lumbered up the stairs. A slamming outer door was his only response. From the ensuing quiet, I judged Rigetti had gone back to his solitaire. Meanwhile, I looked about for some means of escape. I found it at last, on the table beside me, the broken jars, glass edges to cut my bonds. Purposefully, I edged my chair closer to the table end. If I could get a piece of that glass in my hands. As I moved, I strained my ears once more to make sure that any noise made by the chair would be inaudible to Rigetti, waiting outside. There was no sound from the chair as I reached the table, and I sighed with relief as I maneuvered my pinioned hands until they grasped a piece of glass firmly. Then I began to rub it against the edge of the rope which bound them. It was slow work. Minutes ticked away into hours, and still no sound from outside, save a muffled series of snores. Rigetti had fallen asleep over his cards. Good. Now if I could get my wrists free and work on my feet, I would be able to make it. My right hand was loose at last, though my wrist was damp with mingled sweat and blood. Cutting away from behind was not a precise, calculated sort of job. Quickly, I finished the work on my left, then rubbed my swollen fingers and bent over to saw at the ropes on my legs. Then I heard the sound. It was the grating of rusty hinges. Anyone who has lived in archaic houses all his life learns to recognize the peculiar, eerie clang. Rusty hinges grating from the cellar beyond. From an iron door, a scuffling sound among the coal. The iron door is concealed by the coal pile. Filippo only stayed down here one night. All they found was his leg. Jonathan Dark babbling on his deathbed. The door locked from the other side. Tunnels to the graveyard. What lurks in graveyards, ancient and unseen, then creeps from crypts to feast. A scream rose in my throat, but I choked it back. Rigetti still snored. Whatever was going on in the outer room, I must not wake him and lose my only chance of escape. Instead, I had best hasten and free my legs. I worked feverishly, but my ears were alert for developments. They came. The noise in the coal pile abruptly ceased, and I went limp with relief. Perhaps rats were at work. A moment later, I would have given anything to have heard the coal rattling again, if only to drown out the new noise. There was something creeping across the cellar floor, something crawling, as if on hands and knees, something with long nails or claws that rasped and scraped. There was something croaking and chuckling as it moved through the cellar dark, something that wheezed with bestial sickening laughter, like the death rattle in the throat of a plague-stricken corpse. Oh, how slyly it crept, how slowly, cautiously and sinisterly, could hear it slinking in the shadows, and my fingers raced at their work even while my brain grew numb. Traffic between tombs and a wizard's house, traffic with things the old wives say can never die. Rigetti snored on. What bides below, in caverns that can be invoked by the proper spell or the sight of prey? Creep. And then Rigetti awoke. I heard him scream once. He didn't even have time to get up or draw his gun. There was a demoniac scurrying across the floor as if made by a giant rat, then the faint sound of shredding flesh, and over all, a sudden ghoulish baying that conjured up worlds of nightmare horror in my shattered brain. Above the howling came a series of low, almost animal moans and agonized phrases in Italian, cries for mercy, prayers, curses. Claws make no sound as they sink into flesh, and yellow fangs are silent till they grate on bone. My left leg was free, then my right. Now I slashed the rope around my waist. Suppose it came in here. They baying ceased, but the silence was haggard with horror. There are some banquets without toasts, and now once again moans. My spine shivered. All around me the shadows grinned, for outside was revelry as in the olden days. Revelry and a thing that moaned and moaned and moaned. Then I was loose. As the moaning died away in the darkness, I cut the final strands of rope that bound me to my chair. I did not leave at once, for there were still sounds in the other room which I did not like, sounds which caused my soul to shrivel and my sanity to succumb before a nameless dread. I heard that pawing and padding rustle along the floor, and after the shrieking had ceased, a worse noise took its place, a burbling noise, as if someone or something was sucking marrow from a bone, and the terrible clicking sound, the feeding sound of gigantic teeth. Yes, I waited until the crunching had mercifully ceased, and then waited on until the rustling slithered back into the cellar and disappeared. When I heard the brazen clang of a rusty door grate in the distance, I felt safe. It was then that I left at last, passing through the now deserted cellar, up the stairs and our unguarded doors into the silver security of a moonlit night. It was very good to see the street lights again and hear the trolleys rumble from afar. My taxi took me to the precinct station, and after I had told my story, the police did the rest. I told my story, but I did not mention the iron door against the hillside, that I saved for the ears of the government men. Now they can do what they like about it, since I am far away. Brr. I did not want anybody prying around too closely to that door while I remained in the city, because even now I cannot, dare not, say what might lurk behind it. The hillside leads to the graveyard, and the graveyard to places far beneath. And in olden days there was a curious traffic betwixt tomb and tunnel, and a wizard's house, traffic not confined to men alone. I'm pretty positive about all this too, not alone from the disappearance of the Filippo gang, or the wildly whispered tales of the foreign men, not alone from these, but from a much more concrete and ghastly proof. It is a proof I don't care to speak about even today, a proof that the police know, but which is fortunately deleted from newspaper accounts of the tragedy. What men will find behind that iron door, I will not venture to say, but I think I know why only Filippo's leg was found before. I did not look at the iron door before I left the house, but I did see something else in the cellar as I passed through to the stairs. That is why I ran frantically up the steps. That is why I went to the government. And that is why I never want to go back to witch-haunted, age-accursed Arkham. I found proof. Because when I went out, I saw Joe Righetti sitting in his chair by the table in the cellar. The lamp was on, and I am quite sure I saw no footprints. I'm glad of that. But I did see Joe Righetti sitting in his chair, and then I knew the meaning of the screams and the crunching and the padding sound. Joe Righetti, sitting in his chair in the cellar lamplight, with his naked body chewed entirely to ribbons by gigantic and unhuman teeth. End of The Creeper in the Crypt by Robert Bloch.